have a nice and lovely third day of Microsoft Ignite. My name is Martina Grom. I'm from Austria, from Vienna, which you probably hear on my accent, that I sound a little bit like Schwarzenegger. I'm an MVP for Office 365. And I'm here today with Sahil, my colleague, and we are doing real-world best practices around Office 365 groups.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sahil. I work as a program manager in Office 365 groups team, where I take care of guest access. It's the same guest access that lights up in Outlook, in Teams, Planner, and SharePoint. So
what we will do today is we will show you real-world best practices, and what we are talking you through the next 45 minutes is, first thing is, how do I get started with groups and Office 365 groups? Why do I need them? Why they are necessary, and what are best practices around them? And then we will keep a while on why it's important to enable self-service and give control back to the users from an IT perspective. And we will show two examples about how you can create a group with a workflow, with a provisioning engine, and so on. And the last part of the presentation is we talk about Office 365 groups and guest access. Guest access is something which is quite important because you are collaborating all day, and you're collaborating not only with internal persons, you always collaborate also with external persons. And we want to go away from the traditional work scenario where you write an email with an attachment, send it back and forth, and update it that way. So we want to go into a modern way of collaboration. So.
Cool. Thanks, Martina, for this amazing introduction. To give you guys some context, I'm going to talk something which you may have already heard before in various keynote sessions, that teamwork is changing. Today, more and more teams are collaborating, and this collaboration is not just confined within your organization. It involves people who are outside your organization, teams that are remotely located in a different country, different time zone. And we also know that workforce is getting more diverse. There are more Gen Z workers joining, and they literally breathe in, breathe out in all consumer apps like Snapchat, WhatsApp, and for them, when they come to work, it's the whole new world. And last but not the least, we know that teams that work together, they tend to have higher satisfaction and more employee productivity. The good news is that we at Microsoft, we understand this problem, and we have a universal toolkit which gives you a seamless experience for end users by various apps like Teams, Outlook, SharePoint, Planner, Yammer, etc. We also consolidate all the IT management across one pivot so that you don't have to go around each of these apps and set the admin and IT policies. And also, to bring more modern workplace scenarios, we give you analytics, we give you data so that you can build more on top of it and you make most out of Microsoft. Groups is that one service which helps Microsoft to achieve all of these goals. So I specifically added this slide like 10 minutes before the session because this is one question that I've been hearing so much, that what is Office 365 groups? And I've been hearing different versions from different people, but to clarify that, Office 365 groups is a membership service which lights up in all of these apps so that you can have shared collaboration. You can seamlessly move from one app to the other without losing any context. It's centralized the IT admin policies in one single place so that if you apply policies at group level, it'll automatically light up in Teams, Planner, Yammer, SharePoint, etc. And every year we are trying more and more apps to bring Office 365 groups, and the list is growing. Last year we added Stream, Wasabi. There's so many apps that we are going to add in Office 365 group. And last, it's extensible. All these group APIs are exposed through MS Graph so that developers can build custom solutions based on their organization need. With this, I'll hand over to Martina to tell you how you can get started with Office 365 groups.
Yeah, and I take the clicker. to go back and forth with the slides.
Instead of,
So, what's the first example? What we do is, how do I get started with Office 365 Groups? And as you have seen on the previous slide, Groups is like an umbrella service. It's a toolkit. It provisions a lot of other services with it. If you start with Groups, you get a mailbox, you probably get a Yammer group, you get a SharePoint site. You can provision a team on top of the group and so on. And very often, so quick question to the audience, who has disabled Office 365 Groups creation? My heart breaks.
Yeah. The jolt. Yeah.
So for those in the room which have disabled Office 365 Groups creation, it's the thing is, when you disable that and do it, bring it back to IT control and IT management, which means you have a good governance on that, you have a naming policy on that, you can set up the expiration setting, you can have a workflow behind that. But what we see in practice, if you disable Office 365 group creation, you also take away a lot of benefits from users. Because the benefit the user has with an Office 365 group, he creates the group and has immediately the benefit of a shared storage, of a team, of collaboration, of a shared calendar and anything else. So from Microsoft perspective, the recommendation is try to go into self-service. And trust me, I work a lot with IT departments and help them in deployment and going into a governance structure. Trust your users. Please do that. They can do that. Believe me. And when you do that, you can also apply governance afterwards. So you can, for instance, do a controlled group creation workflow to do that. That you say, okay, I trust my users, they can do that, but I want to have it in a controlled way. And you can also go into a workflow scenario where you, for instance, have a workflow where you see, okay, the user wants to create a group and afterwards it will be approved by his manager or not. And this is the first example we will go through in a few minutes. So if we go into managing and governing Office 365 groups at scale, we have here a subset of tools which you use normally. And one of the things is a naming policy. Very often we discuss with customers why naming policy is important. Because one thing could be that you want to have the department applied to the group, or that you want to apply the location on the group with a naming policy, and you can do that automatically. The second thing is, and this is also something about trust, and I love that feature, is the expiration policy. You can apply an expiration policy on the group level. And you do that in Azure Active Directory, and when you apply the expiration policy to that, you give control back to the owners of the group. Because the owner of the group gets a notification, okay, your group will expire in the next 15 days, in 10 days, in 1 day. Oh, it's expired, open a support request. To the next feature, which means you can have soft delete and restore. So if a user accidentally deletes a group or the group expired for whatever reason, the owner of the group was on holidays and the second owner didn't care or anything else, you always have the possibility with soft delete and restore to restore the whole group at once for 30 days. And this is also something which is quite important. Another best practice I want to share is what we learned. It's always a good practice to have more than one owner in a group. Because people leave, people go into other departments, people just forget about that they are the owner of the group, so it's always a good example and best practice to have more than one owner in a group. And then we talked today and in the last days a lot about Microsoft Information Protection, so which unifies everything around privacy and labeling settings and so on. And this is also something which is quite important, that you see This is a private group with confidential content in there, and this raises user awareness a lot if you have that in there. And then we have also guest access reviews, which Sahil will demonstrate. And then there are the traditional workflows, like go with your distribution list and update it and make out of the distribution list an Office 365 group. Or if you're still having public folders, who has still public folders in place? Okay, only half of the people who disabled Office 365 groups. So if you still have public folders in place, you can also update them and use Office 365 groups afterwards. So let's jump in the first demo, and I will show you a workflow. And those who know me or know some of my sessions might have seen that picture again, because we did that for the first time last year at Ignite, and we showed how a group creation workflow can be and work in there. And the group creation workflow we did last year was simply start with a SharePoint list, do a new entry there, open up an approval workflow, manager approves or denies, and then the group is created. What we did we did it the Microsoft way. This year, we enhanced that workflow and extended it. So what we do now is we still use a SharePoint list, but we add privacy settings in there. We also add private and public settings for the group there, and we can also create a team on top of the group. Why did we do that? In practice, we see very often when you create an Office 365 group, you get everything provisioned, except a team. So very often I see in practice a group is created, and then someone creates the team with the same name, but it isn't the same name. So in that workflow, you will see that this is that we create the team on top of that. And jumping into the demo. So I'm here with my alter ego Nestor, and Nestor has here a SharePoint list. And in the SharePoint list, he has a provisioning workflow. So we have here our demo site, and in the demo site, we have a nice provision group list. And what you can do, and you see it's a simple SharePoint list we did in advance. And when you go there, you can open up and say, so the user goes there and says, I need a new group. And he opens that up and says, my new group will have the value Ignite 2018 Hyatt. Then you can see here, I can set up the privacy setting. Is it a private or public group? And as groups are nowadays private by default, following the Teams guidance, we set it up for private, and then I can add the classification, so the Microsoft Information Protection label in there. And as soon as I have that, I said, okay, I will create a private group with confidential content in there. And then you see it's a new group. I can add also a description if I like that. I don't need to write the manager in the next field here, because my flow will look that up for me. And then I can also see here at the end, and I want to create the team right after that. So, and if we do that and save that, you see here in our SharePoint list what happens now. You see this is my new created group. It will provision a team. It doesn't know the manager yet. And you see here on the right, it's confidential and new. And how do I start this group provision workflow? I've added that into Flow, and now I'm going in there into Flow, wait for some seconds, and then you see here request manager approval for a selected item. And this is also a difference between this year and last year, because that kind of flow was not available last year, so we had to build that by ourselves. Now it's a built-in flow, and I can say, okay, write a message to your manager, and I say, please approve, and then I run the flow. what happens with the flow, and I've opened that already here. You see here, this is our flows, and I go here to my flows, and it's a team flow. The reason it's a team flow is because I want to share it with other persons. So I look at the flow, and you see here, this is the current team flow which is running, and you also see we prepared a lot for that session, so you see all the flows we created in the past few days or hours. And when you look here, the flow is currently running, the status is set to pending, and now he starts an approval, and this is the current status. My flow is in there. So what happened in the meantime, the flow looked at the approver, my manager, which is Adele, or like we say in Germany, Adele. And you see here, Adele is already in her mailbox. And she got the approval workflow running in there, and then she can simply go here on approve and fill in any notification and submits that. So that's the job of the manager is now done. She approved the workflow. I won't need her anymore. And I'm going back to my box, and then you see after a while the flow continues to run and goes in there. In theory, it continues to run. And we will see there, and there you go. You see here, now my flow is running. After a while, goes into the condition and said, okay, if yes, it will create the group after that. And then you see here, yes. And what we are doing here in that section, and this is important, we are now triggering an Azure function in behind that. And the Azure function does create the group and also does create the team afterwards. And if we have done that, you see here, I get an information that my group is created. And when I look back into my mailbox, I see, okay, the manager approval is already there, and also the group and the team will be there in a while. So we can control that. If we have the team created, refresh. That's the beauty of Teams. When you talk too long, it gets bored, and you need to refresh it. And then you see after a while, here is my team with the correct name, with the correct email address, and everything is provisioned and approved. And the other thing which is quite important here is I have a private team, and the confidential level is also set to confidential. So this is also something which is really important and really useful to have that. So you might ask yourself, how long does it take to build that kind of scenario? So the good thing is I'm sharing that example on my GitHub. You can just fork it and copy it and use it in your company. It's a ready-to-go example. And the other thing is, if you have that running in there and you have that provisioned, you can also go and extend that kind of workflow in your terms. So for instance, adding a naming policy or anything else, what you might have missed from our example here. So back to the slides. This was the provisioning workflow, and the next demo is back to Sahil, where we will talk about guest access.
Thanks, Martina. So I'm not going to ask you how many of you have enabled guest access, because I don't want my heart broken, but I'll still give you some context. Guest access is one of our fastest growing feature in Office 365 groups, and today, on a daily basis, millions of people use it. And it's a matter of fact, like the result is matter of fact that today 43% of global workforce is made up of contingent workforce. That means these are the people who don't work in your organization, they are outside your organization, and they work with multiple companies at the same time. And one of the very common trend that we are hearing from IT admins is that there is an extensive use of shadow IT to collaborate with these people. Guest access is here to enable a safe external collaboration with these people in a very secure way. It works with any email address on this planet, And it's built up on Azure B2B platform. It's the same platform which lights up guest access in Teams, Planner, and Visual Studio, and all other Microsoft apps. Our guidance here is that enable guest access for your organization. And we have plethora of policies based on your organization needs. Pick up those policies, customize it, and make sure that you have apply them in a secure way. And you can also track guest user activity by audit log. So all the actions that guests take in your company, in your organization, it's all tracked by audit log. So you can track that, you can build dashboard, you can build reporting on top of it. So my first demo is about the basic policies that you can think of when you are enabling guest access. I usually tell my customers to think on two pivots when they think of enabling guest access. The first pivot is who can invite guests, and the second is who can be invited as guests. For who can invite guests, think of a scenario where you want restrict guest addition to specific people. You only want specific people in your company to add guests. This could be managers in your organization. I've seen a lot of companies doing that. They only allow managers to add guests. You can even confine it to a department, like if you want guest access to be enabled only in sales department because they have a lot of external communication, you can enable specifically for that department. So ideally, any user AD property you can have this user managed policy applied on. The second is who can be invited as guest, which is nothing but the domain of the user. So think of a scenario where you have a partnership with other company, or one of your company is your client. You can restrict guests to be added only from that domain. Or you can even think of the other way around, that you want to restrict certain domains, like you don't want consumer domains, Yahoo, Gmail, to be added as guests in your organization. So you can do that as well. Last is, it doesn't fit that pivot, but essentially this works like charm with label-based classification. And this is the group level policy. So think of a scenario, you have a very highly confidential secret group, and you don't want anybody to even accidentally add guests into it. So what you can do, you can disable guest access at group level and enable it for other groups. So in this way, you have made sure that for those secret, highly confidential groups, guest access is disabled. So let's quickly jump onto the demo. Can you see my screen? Yeah, okay. So my first demo is where in my organization, I've allowed only managers to add guests. So if you see the script, this basically gets the list of managers in my organization. I can change to any AD property. And then I apply this guest inviter role. So this is a static role ID which already exists in Azure B2B. You can apply it. You don't really have to create this. So in the interest of time, I've already applied this policy on this tenant, and you can see the list of people who are in guest inviter role. So this is the command to get that. That's the thing with demo. Okay, anyways, so if you can see the list on above this is basically the list of managers who have guest inviter role. So you can see Alex, Enrico, Adele, they all have guest inviter role. So let's go to these users' mailboxes and teams and see how their experience looks like. So in this, I'm signed in as Adele. You can see she's a retail manager. She goes to one of the teams here and try to add guest. You can see guest has been added in this team. On the other hand, I'm signed in here as Emily. You can see she's not the manager, she's a business analyst. She goes to Outlook. She can even go to team, but this policy accrues to all these endpoints. She goes to Outlook. So you can see she got an error that she doesn't have a permission to add guest in this group. One more thing here is that to enable this fully, you have to make sure that you also allow admins in a guest inviter role to add guest in Azure AD portal. The way you can do that, you sign into Azure portal, you go to Azure AD directory, users, and then you go to user settings. Here you have to make sure that you turn this bit on, where admins and users and guest inviter role can invite, and you have to make sure that you disable members can invite. So members are non-admin and non-guest inviter roles. The second scenario here is that where you want to restrict specific domains to be guests from specific domains to be added into the group. So there are two ways to do that. There's a PowerShell script which we've already published. You can use that. Also, you can do it via UI, and it's in the same location, same portal. So you select, in this case, I've selected the allow list, and I've put in 3 domains, Contoso, Gmail, and Microsoft. I can also use regex here. So for example, if I want to use yahoo.com and yahoo.co.uk, I can just use yahoo and star. It'll take care of all the domains, subdomains out of it. One more thing here is that if your organization has already been using SharePoint, guest access in SharePoint, like quite long before it was released in group, you can easily migrate those policies with just one commandlet and apply the same policies to Azure B2B. All of this has been published, and we can even talk about it after the session. How do you do that? But it's just one single command that you have to run, and you should be able to do that. So let's see the demo. So this time I'm going to demo in Outlook. So I'm part of this group. I'm owner of this group, Adele, as Adele. Let me add a domain that I'm. So I clearly get an error, which is very clear that my organization doesn't allow guests from this domain. For more information, contact the IT admin. The third demo, which I'm quickly going to cover because this has been out for a very long time, is blocking guest access at group level. So the way this works is that you have this script, and you have a very static template which is called group.unified.guest. You pick up that template and then you apply to group object, and once you apply to that group object, the guest access is disabled in that group. For demo purposes, I have already enabled that in one of the teams, and if you go to this team and if you try to add guest, you can clearly say guest access is disabled here because the string doesn't say that you can add guests. Otherwise, for the other group, you could see that you can add. And even if you try to add guest, you will not even see guest as a suggestion here. So yeah. My next demo so now you've seen that how you can restrict guest addition into the group. My next demo focuses on how you as an IT admin can manage guests. And this is one of the very common problems that I've heard from IT admins, is that guests are being now added by information workers. And once their job is done, information workers don't care about what do they have to do with this guest. These guests are lingering in your directory. They still have access. You don't know whether they still have access or what they are doing. So the next feature that I'm going to demo is called guest access review. This basically gives like a policy to IT admin to have a periodic review, so that a group owner, the one who added guest in that group, have to make sure whether this guest is required or not. And then a group owner will also get an intelligent recommendation based on guest behavior, whether this guest should be required in the system or not. This is relatively a new feature, so I'm going to go step by step and show you how it works. And there are some new feature announcements that I'm going to do here, which will be soon rolling out in private preview. So let's get to the demo. First thing that you can see here is that if you go to Azure AD portal, you can filter all the guest users in your organization. These are all your guest users, and you also know the source, where they've come from, whether they were invited through portal, whether they were invited by IT admin, whether they were invited by information worker. To start with access review, you can simply search here, access review. Once you come to this page, this page is very informative. It has some really good documentation around how you can enable access review, and it also says what are the scenarios that you can drive. For example, you can reduce unnecessary guest membership. You can even reduce unnecessary group membership. So my focus here is that I'm going to demo how it works for guest users, but you can do this similar thing for your internal members as well. Think of a scenario, you have a very secret confidential group, and you just want to make sure that there are right people in that group. So you can run this access review periodically for that group as well. And if they are not required, they'll be chucked out of the group. And this also works for apps. Like if you have a very specific app in your organization, like CRM, Salesforce, etc., you can even apply this policy on that. So on my left side, you see programs and control. Programs are nothing but collection of access reviews. It's basically a class, and then you link all these reviews here. It's basically used by auditors because when there's an audit that happens, they just want to make sure that they filter, they segregate reviews accordingly. For example, I have created a program here which is called demo reviews, which means all my demo access review will land here. So as an auditor, I can clearly ignore this because I don't care about demo reviews. And you can even create a new program, simple name and description. Control is where all your access review reside. You get to see all the existing reviews that you have, which program that they are linked to, what's their status. So let's quickly start a new access review. First field is review name. It's pretty straightforward. Description is same, start date is same. Frequency is something important. Frequency is something how frequent you want this review. Do you want it once a week? Do you want once a month? Do you want once a quarter? You can fix that. One more important thing here is that all these values are discrete. But let's say if you want to put a random value like 79 days, 80 days, you can do this through MS Graph API. So this access reviews is exposed through MS Graph. You can create your custom reviews through MS Graph APIs. So I'm going to select monthly here. Duration is basically how long do you want this review to be actionable. So that means if I keep it 14 days, the group owner has to act on it in 14 days. And if he doesn't act on this 14 days, then the completion action will take place. End is pretty much same like Outlook calendar, setting up recurrence. You can set it till eternity, you can put an end date, or you can even define number of occurrence here. Users are basically whether do you want to review group membership or do you want to review app membership. Scope is guest users, whether you just want guest review here or do you want all the members here. Selecting a group is which group do you want to have review. So let me just. Now you've selected the group. By default, it's the group owners who have to review this membership. But you can even select somebody who's not a member, and you can even select members themselves to review it. This is the last member bit is used for a scenario where, let's say you want to see whether this account is actually active or not, so you can make sure, like think of a scenario where the other persons leave the company and it's still added as a guest in your organization, so you can use that to do it. Program, basically, yeah, you can link it with anything. This is a very important piece, and this is something where we have new features. So the last bit here that you see, what action should be applied to denied user, this is something that we are going to release in private preview. The way this setting works is that you have to make sure what will happen to these guest users once the review is complete. Do you want to delete them from directory directly? Do you just want to remove them from membership? All this basically all this basically is taken care in this setting. And this is the last bit that we introduce. This is the first time that I'm demoing this here. And advanced setting is basically how do you want to manage notifications? Do you want recommendation or not? And let me just hit the start button. Okay, there was a problem. There was no problem. So we are running short on time, but in the interest of time, I already have this mail, what the review mail looks like for a group owner. So this is one. This is how the owner gets the mail that they have to review guest membership. You click on Start Review. It takes you to the Azure hosted app, which is Access Review. And this has all the information, what the action that they have to do. Okay. So this is these are the other owners who requested it, what's the time. I know this bug. So
you're the program manager.
Yeah,
you should know.
I know it, yeah. So this is the, just quickly, so these are the guest users in the organization. And let me see if I can. And this is the recommendation. So basically, the recommendation here is that based on user activity, whether they have signed in or not, this system recommends they should be in the directory or not. And you can choose to override that. You can choose to pick up that recommendation. So I'm here. I'm overriding the recommendation. Oh God. Yeah, demo gods are not with me today. Okay. But anyways, you got the intent. So once I hit the save button, the action will be taken, and the guest will appropriately removed or continue to be as a member of the group. So with this, I quickly give to Martina so that she can continue the presentation.
Yeah, and to add to that presentation, I'm simply heading along with all amazing stuff Sahil just showed you, including the announcement about that guest access review, because what we have seen here is, I'm just going here to the result of that, is that guest access means you have a lot of guests in your Azure Active Directory, and you need to manage them as well, and you probably don't know how are they coming into the group and how are they working in your groups. And with the guest access review, you give control back to the users, and the user can review that and then prove and deny that. And also, one thing I wanted to show you, and you see it here on the slide deck, is what have we done is we took an Azure function, we pulled all groups through Microsoft Graph into a table, and then we sent to every person who is an owner of the group, which contains confidential information, an email which runs every day in the morning that the owner of the group needs to review if the guest who is in the group, in the confidential group, still needs to have access to that group and still needs that. And this is a very good example about how governance can work, that you see, okay, this is a strictly confidential group, and depending on that, the owner of the group has to make a review of any guest who is part of the group. So the last part we are doing here before we go into a wrap-up of the session is group policies and information protection. Why do we need that? So that means if you have guidelines in your groups, that means every person knows, okay, I can create private groups, I can set the sensitivity level on the groups, and how do I communicate in the group? It's always helpful to have also usage guidelines in the groups and use that. Another point you do when you go into security and compliance is set up retention policies. And what does that mean? A retention policy helps you that a group couldn't be, and the content couldn't be accidentally deleted, and the content is still stored there. And on the other side, you can also set up a deletion policy, an expiration policy. And that means I don't need the group anymore. It will be automatically deleted after a while, or the group owner has to decide that the groups needs to be deleted. And the guidance on that is configure the classification, also set the sensitivity level, and you can audit the groups on a frequent level. So if something happens in there from an IT admin perspective, you go into the Security and Compliance Center and make an audit from there. And the next part here is you can also set up group reporting. And group reporting is also something you have from an admin perspective in your admin center. So you just go there, you see the usage of the groups and so on, and this is quite important. Many IT admins are afraid because they say, okay, there's a group, it's eating up all my SharePoint storage, even if I have terabyte-wise storage in there. Then you can set up an auditing and see, okay, which groups uses how many storage in there and so on. And you can do that either through the built-in adoption content pack where you see the usage of that, because there could be a group which has a lot of storage in SharePoint and another group who has a lot of conversations in Teams and not so many files. And the last thing I wanted to show you is a group's governance dashboard we developed that helps an IT administrator to look at how that could work from an IT admin perspective. And so, yeah. I go back to my demo group, and I'm here. And here you see this is a group's governance toolkit. And what does the group governance toolkit do? It loads up a Power BI dashboard, which reports all groups I have in my tenant. And you see here, these are all my groups which different owners with one or more or 3 or 4 owners. And I also see here in that dashboard, is the group team enabled or not? And the beauty around that is this information is doing once a day, or you can trigger that twice a day and so on. And if you go into that SharePoint space, you can just query the group and you say, okay, this is a group with 1 owner, or this is a group who has 2 guests. And then you see how many groups are affected by that. And you see that here on the right with the filter and see, okay, I have 1 group with 1 owner and 2 guests in there, and that's the Vienna group. And this is a built-in functionality. You can just do that and fill it into Power BI and add the Power BI dashboard. In our example, I added it to SharePoint, but you can also add it to your team site or anything else. And this is something which is a really helpful tool if you have that and can do that after that. So back to the slide deck and a little summary, because I promised I will always finish on time. We have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. So the call to action here is, and we just showed you the results and what happens there is, please enable group self-service and make it with a controlled workflow working in there. You can go with that example and then you apply the naming policy, expiration policies, and so on. From the demonstration we showed with Sahil is also make a governance around guest access and classification and enable that as well. And you can finally just copy the example from my GitHub repository where we find all that examples. One important part for the IT pros among you, it's not C# code, it's all built in PowerShell. So everyone can do that. It's very easy to do that. And the other important part here is we are using an Azure function. You might wondering how much costs are applied with an Azure function. And I want to direct you to another session by my colleague. It's a theater session starting in 1 hour. An Azure function is not sensitive to costs. It doesn't produce a lot of costs there. So it's really, and you can trigger it on a scheduled time and so on.
Yeah, one thing I want to add, feel free to drop by at our booth. Feel free to attend sessions. There'll be video after this session as well. And feel free to ask any question that you have. We are here to help you to enable groups in your organization, and we'll be more than happy to do that. Yeah.
And if you're interested in more Office 365 group session, a colleague of us, Mike, is doing a session tomorrow. It's all around PowerShell. It's called Office 365 Groups Inside Out. Yeah. And also those PowerShells are shared in there.
Yeah, cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.